Hi everyone, welcome to the version 1 release of our Cursor Snapper add-on for Grease Pencil for Blender. The function of the add-on is actually very simple, but what it does allows us to unlock a massive amount of potential in the cursor method of placing our grease pencil drawing. Because the 3D cursor doesn't actually require any object keyframes for the grease pencil, it enables a very freeform kind of way of working wherein you place the cursor, you draw, you place the cursor, you draw wherever you want it in 3D space. So you can kind of really feel out a pathway through an environment. It's a way of working that I personally find really exciting because I find it very liberating not having to deal with object keys and then the whole thing with sliding versus stepped. That's a non-issue anymore. So as you can see from the videos I'm showing here at the moment, the character is moving through 3D space very much in the way that the object mode can do that, but there are no object keys here. And you can see here, because I've got the onion skin on, you can actually see the whole path running through the environment. Ed and I went back and forth on this for quite a while, trying to figure out the best methods for making it a really nice workflow. This video is kind of a workflow and an add-on together. They go hand in hand. It wouldn't be much good just putting the add-on out and not describing how I incorporate it into the workflow, because they really are entwined. To get the add-on, I'll be leaving a link in the video description for you to follow. Please click that link. That will take you to the product page on Ed White's Gumroad. The version 1 is free for everyone. Really want everyone to get their hands on this and start playing with it. If you do find it useful and you want to toss a coin to the Gumroad, then please feel free. We'd appreciate that. Also, if you haven't already, hop over to Ed White 3D on YouTube and give him a subscribe and check out his up and coming storyboard and animatic add-on. Ed's a good guy, worked hard on this add-on. God bless you, Ed. Once you've got the add-on downloaded, then you know the drill. Go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, Install, find where you've saved it, click it, install it. It'll come up here. Cursor Snapper, click it on, and you're nicely installed and we're ready to go. Okay, so let's dig into the workflow. Let me show you where the add-on is. Over on the right of your viewport here, go to View, and down at the bottom of that is a add-on called 3D Cursor Snapper. And in that we have the grease pencil grid that you can switch on and off. We have the assign button. It's very simple UI, and you don't actually need it right now. Okay, so the first part of the process is all to do with Blender's cursor placement. Down on the bottom here in the timeline, I've got a object keyframe timeline here, the normal playback one, and I've also got a grease pencil one, so you can see then for yourself that there are no object keyframes. It's all on the grease pencil. As normal, we use Shift and right click to move the cursor wherever we want it to be. I love this cursor tool. It's got so much utility in so many different ways. So then we press Shift A to make our grease pencil object. So very important now in this method is to pay close attention to your canvas. If your canvas is not on, we've actually added a shortcut here called grid in our language. So you can press that and it comes on, off. Remember, the settings for the canvas are actually down here in your grease pencil object. Scroll down to the bottom and you can change, the color of it, the size of it, the scale of it, the width. Now, what you need to do is just pay attention to how tall your character is going to be on that grid. I found the easiest way to keep track of volume was to use the grid and just stick to it. So then we need to switch into draw mode. Tab, draw mode. Make sure I got my ink and my black sorted. Now at the top, these are really important, right? So 3D cursor is the setting we want instead of origin or surface. Origin is essential when you're using the object mode. That's the way to keep everything consistent. But in this mode, it is all about 3D cursor. For the time being, I'm just going to stick with front elevation because it's just simpler for the first rough layout pass. And then once I get into setting up some cameras, then I go into view mode so that I'm always the correct angle from the camera. Okay, so now I'm going to start drawing in my character. This is going to be super loose. I got serious lag when I tried drawing while recording, so I'm just gonna keep this really loose, guys. Right, so yeah, just blocking the volume here. I've decided I'm going to keep this character, like, say, roughly three grids high as a general kind of proportion, and try and stick with that. Once I've got my first keyframe, then I want to move the timeline along to, say, 10 frames along. I'm just going to do 10 frame increments probably. I move the cursor, and then I start drawing my new position. And I'm doing this super loose, super freeform, and just place the cursor, do my sketch. This is very much to me like the layout portion of the exploration. You know, it's like I just want to feel my way around the scene. I want to throw my character about. I just want to think, right, is he going to go over here? He's going to kind of run over here. He's going to dive over there. What's the path of action? You know, what kind of terrain are we going up and down on? Terrain are we going left and right? What I kind of like about this method is, if I had to do this in the object mode, I would have to be keying all these kind of, like, he goes here, he goes left, he goes right, he goes up, he goes down, and I'm keying all that stuff. And then I kind of have to, I found with the object mode for stuff like that, you kind of end up fighting the object keys with the grease pencil keys. So doing it this way, as you can see the way I'm working here now, it's just very freeform. I don't have to think at all about object keys. And so I'm just placing the cursor, I'm drawing in my little doodle, my little squiggly doodle. It doesn't matter how loose it is right now. These are almost just like coordinates you can think of as well, right? You're just kind of laying out roughly what's the coordinate of the path that you are then going to use to snap to. And even though I've kind of kept the camera roughly the same angle here, you don't have to. You have the freedom to just move the camera around wherever you want. It's only when I start like actually thinking about what camera angle I would shoot the action from, then I start refining character placement and then using the view mode to draw the proper character, like Tiedown art or something on it, right? So at the moment I'm still throwing him about the place. I'm having some fun. I'm thinking, where can he go? He can go over here, he can run, he can dive, he can roll, he can jump. Now, I've been a naughty boy with it. You can see my proportion is way off on that, right? I've only drawn him 2 grids high on that particular one, which is a bit sloppy. So yeah, slap wrist for that one. So I've kind of taken him all the way over there now, and I've bounced him against that rock, and now he's kind of like going to do a dive backwards. You can see I'm placing the cursor where I want his position to be relative to the ground, so it projects the cursor, the canvas up from the ground. So you always know that, like, even if someone's jumping, if you've got the cursor on the ground, then they're in the air above that cursor. So here's my main sample scene using that same process. All right, so the keys are already done. I'm just going to run you through how I place them down. This is the rough layer first, right? So this was my equivalent of what I've just shown you there, but for this main sequence. All right, so here he is running along here. Now, in order to do that, I placed the cursor, I drew the character, I then placed the cursor, I drew the character. Place the cursor, draw the character, place the, move along, place the cursor. That's the momentum, right? That's the workflow. So you can do that across any terrain, up, down, left, right, in, out, however you want it, right? As long as you kind of adhere to or keep in mind the general volume, what you've got going on with the character, then you should be fine. And then when we get right to the end, I think is where it really starts to demonstrate how free flow you can get. All right, so this now is absolute free flow in 3D space, right? All of this stuff here, and then this bit here. Now if I pop out of the camera so you can see this, and you can see then exactly where he is in space, right? So this was all done by the same method I showed you, which is you place the cursor, you make your drawing, you place your cursor, you make the drawing, you place the cursor, make the drawing, and then what you get is this, like, here he is, right? He's flowing through 3D space. Back to the start now then, right? So let's say I've done my rough layout. Now, just as a reminder here, at the moment I've got this set to 3D cursor view because I'm now in the camera. So I've already done all my setup of my cameras. I'm not going to talk about that. You can go and watch my other videos if you want to learn how I think about cameras. This is purely about the workflow of the 3D cursor. So now I've got my rough. Okay, so you're going, okay, so you've done all this without the add-on, right? Yes, I've done all this without the add-on so far. Now, crucially, here's the reason why we need the add-on. If I press up and down here to flick through my keys, you can see the cursor and the canvas, therefore, doesn't move. So when you're moving forward for the first time you're drawing somewhere, you don't need the add-on. But if you ever want to get back to where you are, there's quite a few steps you actually have to take by default, which the cursor add-on removes. So how do we actually set up the cursor snapper and then use it? Because what I essentially want to do here now is I want to bounce back to all of my keyframes whenever I want to. I want to be able to refine them, and if I make new layers, I also want to then be able to still bounce through those coordinates whilst drawing on another layer. The first thing is you select the thing in object mode, right? You select the grease pencil in object mode, and then you come over here and you press assign. Okay, so that will then, I've got a bunch of layers here. Normally you'll only have, say, your rough layer to begin with. So I'm going to select my rough layer and I press assign, and that then shows up on here, right? So you've got locked object, so it's just called stroke because I haven't named it anything, and then the locked layer is rough. Now what will happen is if I either press the previous key or next key, it will jump to the next key or previous key, and it will also jump the cursor and the canvas to the exact coordinate of the artwork on that layer. Right? Now it does that in one of three ways. So the one is first. So if I select first and do it, you'll see that it kind of pops it to the point where you first drew a stroke. Personally, I like center because it just kind of centers everything around roughly the mass of the vertices that are there. And then the final setting is base. So what that will do is step to the bottom. Can you see there? So it'll always kind of choose one of the lowest or the lowest vertice of the artwork. This is particularly useful when you're on the ground. So it's always kind of like the lowest point to the ground. So keep it on center, and then you go next. Now you can press those. So you don't really want to be doing that, do you? You want to, because what you want to be doing here, you want to be in draw mode, and you still want to be able to do this and draw, but not have to go back and forth there all the time, right? There is an option, but the shortcut by default is shift and up and down. So in the same way that up and down will cycle through your keyframes normally, but it won't move the cursor snapper. If you hold shift and up and down, it will. That's how you do it, right? So this is pretty much my workflow from this point on. Is I've just got my little finger on shift and I'm pressing up and down, and then I'm kind of refining the shape of that, right? Jump to the next one. I want to go back to the previous one, but I'm in draw mode. I'm not moving my pen here now. My pen stays in the position ready to draw, back and forth, back and forth. So yeah, I'm very much about not leaving the kind of drawing workflow as much as humanly possible. That's what we're trying to do here. So you can see, like how you can just kind of bounce around, right? This is where I was talking about. Imagine having to do those like sort of workaround steps this many times. Every time you wanted to jump back to a position, it would just be an absolute nightmare, right? So anyway, that's the principle of then getting back to that position, and that's showing you how to do that on a single layer. Now, the next thing you would logically want to do is create a new layer for your cleanup. So let's create a new layer here now. Now that's GP layer 1, right? Now I don't need to change anything to do the snapper, right? Now I can still bounce back and forth between the keys I've already selected. So I've still got locked layer rough selected. And so every time I press shift and up and down, it's going to bounce along to those positions, which is what I want, because I then want to know that my cleanup is in exactly the same coordinates as my rough. And so I'm actually on the new layer I created whilst using those previous coordinates. This is the key to me, right? So now I'm in, and let me put fade layers, is it? To make it, yeah, put fade layers on. I'll go in a little closer. This cleanup will be trash because of lag and all that. But let me just demonstrate it. All right. Kind of adorable, actually. And it's here. There we go. Use the cursor snapper. Next one. Yeah, the thing is, this is what I love about it now. See, right? Is I'm in the zone, right? I'm in the drawing space, and if I didn't have the lag, I'd be having a great time. But here we go. Okay, right. So that's probably enough to just demo what the purpose of it is, right? So there we go. Now I've got my keyframes, and again, as I said, it's still. So if I switch off, just to show you, if I switch off the rough layer so it's not visible anymore, then you can see there they are. There's my keyframes jumping along. One thing to remember, the whole shift up and down thing, it works when your pen or your attention is centered on the viewport. Like if I'm down here, it doesn't do it. You can see it's not doing anything. When I'm in the viewport, it does it. So just remember that. If you're like, oh, why isn't the shift up and down working? That's why. Just hold your pen over the viewport and it will work. All right. So then that's how you would then go along and make your cleanup layer. Okay, so let me show you my tie down layer. Okay, so I've still snapped to the rough here, and then I made a new layer like I've just demonstrated, right? And you select the tie down layer or the cleanup layer, and you still then use the shifting up and down, which is snap into the rough coordinates, and then you're drawing your cleanup. Yeah. So then all the way through this, then that's just what I did all the way through. I probably used the onion skin now and again, just like, you know, for consistency and making sure that like the details were consistent. And obviously you can do that on your rough pass as well. You can use the onion skin, which is really helpful. I like onion skin personally. You know, so we're kind of like, you know, here he is running through the donut, the ritual that all Blender beginners must do. You must build the donut and then dive through it. Yeah, so all the way through this, then it's just the same principle, cleaned up all the way through. You can see all the way through this now, you know, I've got the view mode here, so everything's facing camera. Yeah, and then stuff like this as well, you know, even if you're at a high angle then, so when you're through the camera, view gives you that nice projection, so it's nice and clean in front of the camera. Yeah, I don't think there's really much more to talk about in terms of what I did for that's it, right? You just go and clean it all up now using this method. And then the next step was to, if I switch the rough off, I dropped in some colors, and I did that in exactly the same way. I'm still snapped to the rough coordinates. So once you've kind of set it up, you don't have to change it. I think actually when I did do the colors, when I did my flats, I did actually switch it to tie down. So there might have been some changes, you know, the way I might have manipulated some of the positions of the lines, or even the position of the character overall using edit mode. And so once you're happy with a pass, you then assign yourself to that layer, and then you're using that coordinate then for your next pass. So it kind of is a process of refinement, I suppose, but they're pretty much all the same, right? They should all be on the same in the same position. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other methods you have to incorporate in order to make this work, right? So one of the difficult things once you're inside the camera is to know where the feet are, right? So if I jump back to it's a good example of this is, here we go, because you can't see the feet, right? So you're not sure now, right? Now when you did your layout version of this, right, you probably were and when I did it, I know I was going through this, right, and I was placing the cursor, drawing on when I was doing my rough like pathing layer, right? So I know that he's fine, right? So when I'm in my cleanup mode, then I know that it's correct. But if, for instance, you were doing this through the camera and you were creating a scene through the camera and you can't see the ground contact, that can really mess with your brain then. Once you actually, like, say you pop outside the camera and look at it, and it's like things are totally not where you expected them to be, because you need that kind of grounding to understand where you are in 3D space. So what I advise for that is that when you are doing your initial pass, that you certainly do it in a more layout method, as I demonstrated at the beginning, where you're outside of the camera. And then another way of keeping that consistent throughout, and this is what I also did just to kind of check on it, because there were certain tricky shots where I wasn't quite sure where my feet placement were. I would then just jump to, like, I have another view open, right? Have a layout view ready to rock in either, you know, in another tab, or like have it to the side of your screen, however you like to lay your different windows out, right? So this would be the camera mode here. So I know this is what it's going to look like through the camera, and then my layout mode is showing me exactly then, like, you know, where that cursor is, where the cursor and the canvas are in a more three-dimensional layout sense. I think that's a good way of working anyway. Whenever you're doing anything in Grease Pencil and Blender, is just to have that layout mode at your beck and command. The majority of what you're going to be doing in this method of working is just drawing and positioning things by drawing and then amending them by drawing. But let's say you want to tweak things in the way that you can in other modes, like edit mode, object mode, stuff like that. Object mode, don't do anything in object mode in this version, right? Because what all will happen in object mode is if I move this, it'll just move like the entire thing. It'll just throw everything off, right? So you just don't touch object mode if you're going to use the cursor method. If you want to manipulate, say, the position of your character artwork, or you want to do like edit mode type stuff, then go into edit mode, and that all works the same as it does on anything else. Yeah, so you grab it in edit mode and you move it, or you want to like stretch it or scale it, you know, all that's the same. And actually, you kind of, if you do want to manipulate things, like manipulate the actual position of the artwork within 3D space, if you're not happy with it or you just want to change it for whatever reason, that has to be done in edit mode. And so let's jump to like a layout view here now. Say I wanted to change, so I'm looking at this now, right? I'm flipping through with my my cursor thing, and yeah, I'm like, oh, I kind of want him to move more through 3D space than that by this point or something. Then I would then highlight the vertices and then use my usual method of moving things. The reason that's not grabbing that is because the other layer is locked. Right, so if I want to move all these down, I press A, and then I can move the character in edit mode, and that's how you do that then, right? So it's not done in object mode. Like normally this was the kind of fight, wasn't it? Was that you would have the object keys and then you'd have to move the object keys and then move the grease pencil. So in this one there are no object keys. Okay, so if you want to move your artwork in an object-y kind of way, like in 3D space, then you have to grab it in edit mode and move it. I've got some ideas how to make this easier, but basically, yeah, edit mode and cursor mode, no object mode. Okay, so what if you have multiple grease pencil objects that you've done this way, or you just have multiple grease pencil objects that you would like to use the cursor snapper on, because it can be used on anything that has keyframes, basically. So I've duplicated the character here now, and we're currently snapped to this one, this guy here. So when we flip through, it'll flip to him. So if I want to snap to this guy instead, I'm in object mode, I click the character, I press assign, and now we are snapped to that character. And if I want to go, say, you know, run the, it doesn't matter, is it rough? I'm on the rough layer, snap into that, and then I go on this guy, and just press assign, and now I'm back to that one. So say you had a bunch of characters that were interacting here and you really wanted to like tighten up the choreography, but you had to kind of jump back and forth between them. That's the way to do it. It's nice and simple. This works across as many objects as you want as well. Let's touch on in-betweening a little here. So because the cursor method places the strokes within 3D space, there's obviously a gap between those positions in the space. So if you want to in between two keys, you've got, like for these two keys that are on screen here, right? So we've got this position, and the cursor is on that currently. Sorry, let me jump to draw mode, and then that cursor there, and then you can see the next position. I strongly advise using onion skin for in between in cursor mode. Okay, so how you do it then is basically like, so you just kind of flick back and forth, and you can see where that is roughly in space, right? And then for the in between position, then I would place my cursor, say, halfway between those, and then I would draw my in-between position, and then once he's there, the cursor snapper will then jump to it whenever you want, right? As long as you pretty much only have to make a single mark, a single vertice for this to work, which will come into play in a moment when I show another fun way of kind of pathing things out. But anyway, yeah, so this is how I would sort of suggest doing in-betweening, because then you can see, if I pop out of the camera, so outside of the camera then, or with the camera raised, you can see that looks pretty good. Yeah, they look as if they're on the right track. Yeah, so that's that. Let's jump to a slightly more awkward angle, one where we can't perhaps see the floor. let's go to this one again, right? Because this is a good example as we used earlier. So I can't see the feet here. So making an in-between position between these two characters would be quite tricky. So if I jump the cursor here, actually it's not, because he's running in a linear fashion here, right? You don't actually have to worry about moving the cursor. If I go between these two frames now, if I go there, right? And it doesn't matter, I can literally just in between this, like you would normally, yeah? In between that. And it's fine, because he's kind of running straight. It's if a character is moving sort of in and out and up and down and left and right and things like that, because then it really matters where your grounding is. Okay, here's a good example of one that is perhaps a little bit trickier, right? So let me jump my cursor. So that's another thing as well, wherever you are, even if you haven't selected the, you haven't snapped the cursor, if you're wherever you are on the timeline, if you press up and down, it'll jump to that keyframe. Alright, so here now he is definitely doing an arcing path. So let me try and put one between these here. Okay, so that's quite tricky, right? So you've got a curve. So I'll go between, currently, make one between here. So the keyframe I'm looking at is between this one and the blue one. So I would need to put the cursor there. That looks like it's roughly between them, right? And then I would start to in between the position. Let's say something like that. Yep, and the cursor, the canvas roughly looks right there. That's what you have to do basically. You kind of just position the cursor between the two positions and then draw in between using the onion skins. Let's talk about how we draw things in the air, because the whole method behind the cursor snapper is that we place the cursor on the ground and then we draw on the canvas that is projected up from the ground. So how does that work when we're in midair? So yeah, let's use this shot as a case study for that, because he's in midair, like quite a way in the midair here, and he goes all the way across to jump out of that, right? So normally, as I was saying, once you're inside the camera, you want to be in view mode, because that means that the canvas is always going to be pointing at the screen. Everything's going to be nice and clean and flat and everything, right? But when you've got a situation like this, perhaps a better way of doing it, which is how I did this shot, was to, once I established like where he is here, right? So I did that just from, coming off the previous scene, I knew where he is in space, right? So there, I still had the cursor touching the rock there, and then what I did instead is I switched it to side view, I think, right? That gave me like a straight canvas, and you can in the canvas settings, you can of course make the canvas enormous if you want to. Just be mindful that you're going to be you might change the scale of your squares then, and that might throw off your volume. So just take a note of whatever size it is. So you can use the canvas, because it's essentially just going to go in a straight path, like across the canvas. Because there's an invisible wall here, right, when you've got a canvas. And so that's what you're doing. You don't actually then need to, for each one of those keyframes, I didn't have to make a new cursor point, right? I knew that if I just keep drawing, it's just basically on this flat plane, and it's going to be fine. So as long as you set that up with that in mind, it'll work. Alright, so since the advent of 2.91, which now has the ability to interpolate strokes in edit mode, this actually gives us a really kind of interesting way of pathing through a scene. I've only recently discovered this, because obviously it's a very new feature, but this could really, really work. Alright, so instead of, say, how I was doing in the main demo, which was to place the cursor, draw the character, place the cursor, draw the character, what you can also do, or if you so wish, is you can just kind of, so I'm on frame 1, right? All I have to do, it doesn't really matter what kind of thing you're in here, so 3D cursor view, I'll put it on side, just whatever, right? So make a dot, Then scroll across to, let's do it in increments of like 50. Right, okay, so I want my character to go here by 50. Alright, so I just make a dot. That's all you have to do. No real investment here yet, alright? Then I'm going to have him go, let's say he's going to do a full circle. Dot. Then 150. I want to come about there. 200. Be about there. 250 up on top, right? So now if I use my 3D cursor snapper, I assign to it, right? So it's assigned to the GP layer on the stroke. I can now use my shortcut or my buttons down here to snap through those positions. Now that's pretty cool in and of itself, right? So that actually is quite a nice way of, you can imagine yourself pathing through an environment like that quite nicely without really investing too much. And then you could even get your timings and stuff down before you've even drawn anything. It's quite nice. It's sort of the equivalent of how you might block out in object mode, but without the worry of using any object keyframes, right? But there's a new addition to, this is insane, right? So, okay, now I'm going to jump into edit mode. And if I hold my cursor, I think anywhere between two keys, if I now go to interpolate right at the top here, and then I can choose the step. So I'm going to go for, say, 5, right? Step it on 5s or something, right? And I press sequence. Oh my god. Now we have we have in steps of 5 incremented between. So now if I jump using my crease pencil, look at it. This literally came out, I'm making the video and this came out about a week ago, I think, and it's just, look, so you can see the distance it does if you don't interpolate it. And that's all you have to do, is you just have to press the button because it remembers it, sequence. I'm pretty sure there's probably a way where you can select all the keys and then press it, but it doesn't seem to work for me. So you can do that. Interpolate sequence, and then now we have a super in between, and it's all still stepped and everything. So awesome, because yep. But that's pretty amazing, right? That I didn't anticipate this. It just kind of like the stars have aligned on this one. You know, the new feature in Grease Pencil absolutely complements the add-on we've added in, or vice versa. Through some further experimentation, I found an even more fun way of pathing out a path. Okay, so I've got my my grease pencil down here. If I put the cursor on, you can see that there's the canvas, right? But I'm going to try something different here now. So I'm going to switch it to surface mode, and when you do, make sure you drop this down a bit, so like next to nothing, right? Because it means like it'll be slightly above the ground otherwise. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of this really cool feature in Blender where you can record and then press play on the timeline so time passes while you're doing other things. Alright, so if I press play now, and then what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to place dots on the timeline as I go along for where I want the character to go. Alright, so I'm going to press play. 3, 2, 1. Deet, 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 deet. Pump. Alright, leave it there. Doesn't look like much at the minute, but if I switch this now back to cursor mode, and because I am assigned to that layer, I can now don't you love it when a plan comes together? Look at this. I wasn't expecting this, to be honest with you. This is all just through experimentation. And then, of course, as I showed you earlier, you could then interpolate sequence. And then you could just go and fill all that in if you want to do that. Interpolate sequence. If anyone knows of a way to do the interpolation across all keyframes, please let me know in the comments, because that would be a great time saver. But this is a really fun way of working, right? Like how quickly we've got a path, right? So then you can go in and obviously start, we've got our coordinates now, we've got our keys that we're going to snap to. Go back in, either use center, base, or first. I'll stick with center, it's my favorite. So then we'll do like, okay, so 1Z dude is going to, he's preparing to launch off here. Doing a bit of an antic. Sorry about the lag again. Oh, give him 2 arms. Next keyframe. So what'll happen there is, because the point is on the floor, it'll jump to the floor. But remember, like, you know, if you switch, if we switch onion skin on, maybe we can see where he is. So we know that we actually want him to jump up here. So we just draw up here, and we know that we're in the correct, like, relative to ground kind of thing. Anyway, you get the idea, right? So if I pop back there now, and you can see how quickly we can start laying this stuff in. Yeah, I think this is a good method. Yep, it might not be one you always want to use, but I think it's definitely a method, right? And I think I'll be using this quite a bit. I'd like to highlight a couple of drawbacks or things to avoid or be mindful of, and highlight if a couple of things actually don't quite work correctly if we're using the cursor method. So please bear in mind as well that the cursor method, an add-on that we're putting across here, isn't meant to replace object mode. It's not meant to replace the way it's designed to work. It's meant to complement it. So there are some scenes or sequences or moments that will definitely benefit from the cursor method, but there are also other times where you'll just want to stick to object mode, and there's other times where you'll probably even want to just stick a grease pencil in front of the camera and do it that way. So we're by no means trying to like say object mode doesn't work. Of course it does. I've done loads of videos about it, and I'll continue to do loads of videos about it. So one thing to bear in mind then with object mode, right? If you've done something with the 3D cursor, especially something as extensive as this, right, where it goes right the way through the environment, then you really don't want to be touching object mode after this, unless you want to completely restage all of the action, right? Because this is what happens. If I grab the object like you would normally here now with G, you see it's not just that, the whole thing moves, right? This is because the origin is way back at the beginning. So that's what happens. I mean, it's great if, you know, you do have to do that. It's kind of, you know, it's fun to see it like this. You know, if you wanted to add, like, say, you know, an array of this, and then you could array this and then kind of or duplicate it just for fun. You know, this could be, you know, there's definitely utility to doing that kind of thing, but anyway, what I'm saying is, if you move the object, you move everything. When using cursor mode, because the origin doesn't move, that does affect the way that some of the modifiers work on it, right? So modifiers and effects, some modifiers like the noise modifier, for instance, works absolutely fine. And if I can smash this up to like the thickness modifier is fine, because the thickness modifier is attached to the strokes, right? So it's directly to do with the strokes, so that works fine, as does the noise modifier, so that works fine. So this one's always over the top when you put it on. Just draw the position off a bit. Yeah, so the noise modifier works great as well. No problem is, for anything that's to do with strokes or like the geometry of what you've done, fine, not going to be a problem. Also things like tint works fine, as does hue saturation. Yeah, all that works fine. The thing that doesn't work, but we're looking into it. So the effects, a couple of the effects modifiers don't work as they're supposed to in this thing, because they're kind of tied to the origin of the object, right? So when we have blur and motion blur and the rim effects modifiers, those are all really seem to be related to the origin point. It doesn't mean you can't use them, it just means they don't work as easily as intended. I'll show you. Okay, so if we add a blur modifier to this, if I click use depth of field, it does work. It registers where the depth of field is in my camera. So if I was to, then technically if I click, yeah, it kind of works. So that's with just the if I click on do it a minute. Click that off a minute, and then let's try, you know, like he should be super blurred here, right? This is because we're so far away from the origin. Now this is an extreme case, right? This scene I've done here, you know, we're way away from the origin, which is probably not something you're always going to do. I did this whole thing as one grease pencil object to stress test. You don't have to do that, but let's pump this up to like 200 or something. 200. Yeah, see, it starts to affect it there, right? So the kind of automated side of it, like you set a blur point and then it just carries all the way through, that just doesn't work. So if I actually flick through this now, you'll see he's blurred, and then at some point he's going to stop being blurred. Yeah, see, he's kind of less blurred here, and then now he's totally not blurred, right? Because we've moved even further away from where that's blurred. So what it means is if you want the blur, you can still have it, but you have to manually keyframe it a bit more. Now you have to do that anyway with motion blur. If you want to fake motion blur, you have to just key everything like I did in the sci-fi video. There's something to keep in mind. We're gonna see if we can find a fix for it in the pro version, but for now it's kind of a bit of a weak spot. So let's switch the blur off, and then let's do the same with rim. So we add a rim, and it doesn't really do anything. At the beginning it does. So if I change the position of the rim to how I want it to look, which is probably like, say that, and then I scoot along, see it's fine here, fine. See, it starts drifting. I mean, it's still there. Again, it's kind of like, it's not too bad, but by default in like object mode they would be way more consistent here. So again, it's just a case of if you want it, you have to key in some extra keys to make it work. But anyway, look, it's still there, it still works. You just have to, if you're gonna push your object this far away from the origin, you just have to do a bit of extra work with regards to keying some of these effects. Another thing that doesn't work correctly, so you just have to use an empty instead, it's like a camera constraint. So I've got my camera selected here, and I'm going to add a camera constraint now as if I wanted to track to this object. So I'll select the object, and I'll put the axis. Now you see the camera doesn't move with it. That's because the object that I'm tracking to isn't actually moving. The origin is at the beginning, so that doesn't work. Alright, so tracking an object doesn't work, so you'll have to add an empty into the scene and then just animate the emptied. Parenting also doesn't work, so if I parent this camera to the object, Control P, parent, nothing happens, because again, it's not actually moving as an object, so those things just don't work. Again, we can use empties, or we'll look into seeing if there's another way of making that work. Just wanted to make you aware of these current limitations that we're hoping to find solutions to anyway. That's it for the full tutorial. I really hope you enjoy the add-on and the tutorial, and I can't wait to see what you come up with it. Head has actually set up an online document which we'll link in the video description, which highlights various features and tips and tricks. I've set up a Discord server for my YouTube channel. The link will be in my bio on my YouTube channel and in the description of this video. So feel free to come on over and, you know, tell us what you think, and if there's any issues or anything, we can try and address them there. YouTube's decent for comments, but I think when you need to dig a little deeper, Discord is much better. So come on over, and there's only one thing left to do, and that's